We're at war with Iran, supposedly to stop Iranian nuclear weapons, although we were told that they were already obliterated last year. But Iran has far more deadly weapons of mass destruction to use against us, and now more motivation to attack us as a result of our current war. I'm Dr. Drew Miller, retired Air Force Colonel, Intelligence Officer, and President of the Collapse Survival Institute. This threat assessment briefing assesses Iran's capability to attack the U.S. homeland with weapons of mass destruction and then compares it to other WMD threats. The analytical method that we use for this assessment is multi-criteria decision analysis with 4 WMD weapons of mass destruction that we compare across the criteria shown here. We compare nuclear attack by Iran, what is currently being used to justify war with Iran, with the bioweapons attack, releasing a deadly virus against the US, and then current artificial intelligence, which we're confident is being used by bad people and bad countries like Iran and terrorist groups to develop new weapons of mass destruction, and then super intelligent artificial general intelligence, which the top experts are warning will probably go rogue and try to execute attacks against pesky humans. We compare them across the criteria shown across the top here in these columns. First of all, the ease of developing this WMD attack, and we break that down into 2 parts. First of all, how difficult it is to develop the WMD, and then second, how difficult to execute the attack. We're rating them on the scale shown over here on a 1 to 10 scale. A 10 is a relatively good outcome. It's the best we can hope for. Now, again, we're comparing weapons of mass destruction, so all weapons of mass destruction are bad, but there's different degrees of fatalities and disaster that a WMD can have, and that's what we're comparing in this assessment. So 10 is a relatively good outcome, 5 is a neutral score, it's an average condition or outcome. 0 is a very, very bad outcome, a horrible collapse, a horrible amount of fatalities, a horrible outcome or condition. So for ease of WMD attack, let's look at nuclear weapons. Developing the WMD is extremely difficult now to develop nuclear weapons, and executing the attack is difficult. Now, if you're doing ICBMs, it's extremely difficult. Now, you could have some people come over, bring a small nuclear weapon, try to smuggle it in. We would, of course, try to detect it, but they might be able to smuggle one in. So it's not impossible, but it is a difficult thing to do. Next criteria is the fatalities inflicted. We compare both the direct attack casualties from the attack, and then the indirect are the casualties result from a collapse that develops. If you have just one nuclear detonation, it may not develop a collapse. If you had a large-scale attack, which Iran can't do now, is unlikely to do in the near future, but Russia or China could, that could develop so much devastation that the economy stops functioning, there's widespread loss of law and order, a collapse develops, and certainly that's what you will get in a bad pandemic. So that's the criteria we're rating here, again, on this 10-point scale. Nuclear weapons, the direct fatalities, again, it's really bad if you're near ground zero, but they're very limited in scope when a nuclear weapon detonates. So the impact there is not that bad. Unless it's attacking the electric grid with EMP, that's a completely different issue we won't get into now. For now, we're assuming it's just one nuclear detonation, probably on the ground, not high up in the atmosphere. So it wouldn't destroy our electric grid, but it would certainly obliterate a New York City downtown, something like that. A horrible disaster, but compared to something that goes nationwide in scope, not as bad. And then for the collapse develops, if you're destroying one US city, you're not likely to generate a collapse unless there's panic and fear over future attacks coming. The economy would probably keep functioning. Law and order would probably remain across the vast majority of the United States. You don't have a collapse. So that's why it's not rating very bad for nuclear weapons. They're more localized in effect and not very likely to generate a collapse disaster. Finally, we look at the criteria of the ability to avoid retaliation. If North Korea launches an ICBM against the United States, we know exactly where it came from, and we would obliterate North Korea. We would retaliate and destroy that country. So that's good condition, because if someone knows we can find out who did it and destroy you, they're not likely to use that WMD. Contrast that now, we'll go to the second category, a bioweapons attack releasing a deadly virus. It's almost impossible to figure out where that virus came from if there's just a group of agents releasing the virus in crowded airports in the US. Let's use all the criteria now for bioweapons. They're relatively easy to develop. CRISPR technology is very advanced, very cheap nowadays. When a university's done with their CRISPR system, they buy the latest generation that comes out. The old one that's still extremely capable gets sold at a very low price. So it's not that difficult to modify an H5N1 to make it human-to-human transmissible. We believe that's been done from gain-of-function research. We know it's been done with mammals. We know it's spreading in mammal population. There is a briefing on this on the Collapse Survival Institute on the pandemic threat. But it's a much, much easier weapon of mass destruction to develop than a nuclear weapon. And it's far easier to execute the attack. Agents that Iran has, North Korea, China, Russia, other countries, and terrorist groups have in the United States can easily spread a virus in busy airports and transportation centers, and then it spreads across the US. Fatalities inflicted, horrible with the pandemic. Again, we're not talking COVID-19, less than 1% lethality rate. H5N1 historically has been around a 50% lethality rate, and that kind of a disaster, that kind of pandemic would be an absolutely horrible weapon of mass destruction attack that would cause casualties in the tens of millions or worse. And the collapse it generates is going to be horrible. It will last for over a year. No one's going to go to work when there's a double-digit lethality virus spreading. Well, law and order will break down rapidly as people, knowing they're about to starve, figure it's time for me to go out and steal food and maraud, and law and order breaks down. Ability to avoid retaliation, we already covered, is very low. So you combine these criteria and you get your aggregate score. For nuclear weapons, again, on a 1 to 10 scale, nuclear weapons are not very bad. An Iranian attack, a limited nuclear attack, is not very bad. Again, I'll caution you, we're comparing WMD attacks, so good means not as horrible as other WMD weapons or attacks. Yes, it's still a disaster, but not as bad. Now let's look at artificial intelligence. Again, current AI capabilities. You can be 100% positive that artificial intelligence is being used by bad people to develop new means to kill other people, do horrible things. And that's why it rates very, very bad. You can develop new weapons of mass destruction. You can use artificial intelligence to help make H5N1 human-to-human transmissible. For example, using artificial intelligence with bioengineering technology, with nanotechnology, and developing brand new means of WMD we haven't even thought of to date. Artificial intelligence is already doing that, and it's a far worse threat than nuclear weapons because of the number of new WMD it could create, and then taking existing things like the ability to make a nuclear weapon, designing a way to make it easier to develop a nuclear weapon. That's current AI. The experts, the leading AI safety experts, are warning that superintelligent AGI will not be able to control it. It doesn't matter if the US develops it or China, whoever develops it first, it will escape control, and rogue AI can very well determine that it wants to be in control. It doesn't want people running it. It doesn't want humans to be able to shut it down, so it could decide to execute attacks. It controls robots and it controls weapons increasingly across the world. And superintelligent rogue AI, AGI, a lot of experts are warning, could decide to exterminate humanity. So when you compare WMD threats, it's pretty obvious that the nuclear attack threat from Iran, if they did have the capability, they don't, they're not likely to have it for years. But even if they had it, it's not a very bad WMD threat compared to bioweapons, which they can develop and use now, probably already have. They might even get assistance to develop and release the virus from a Russia or China that has perhaps better capability. Those are much bigger threats. Now, different analysts are going to have different ratings and different assessments of a lot of these criteria, but the differences here in the aggregate are so stark between these two threats that we can confidently say that an Iranian virus bio attack on the US is a far worse threat than Iranian development of nuclear weapons in the future. You could ask, what are my qualifications to make my assessments? And the answer is, I'm a retired Air Force colonel. I served in the Strategic Air Command and as a plans and programs officer at U.S. Strategic Command, as an intelligence officer in the Air Force. And I also served as a research staff member at the Institute for Defense Analyses, doing studies of WMD threats. My article on bioenergy and panicking was published in the American Interest, and I have better qualifications than any member of Congress or the sycophants serving in the leading national security positions of the Trump administration. My book, Preparing to Survive in the Age of Collapse, addresses political, military, foreign policy, and preparedness reforms that are vital for our preparedness to survive the coming collapse disasters we face. I now serve as president of the Collapse Survival Institute to help warn people about the WMD threats we face and to lobby government officials to stop just funding shelters and survival protections for themselves and harden our electric grid, stockpile food for citizens, and focus our national security policy and resources on defending the U.S. homeland and building collapse recovery capability, not fighting wars overseas that raise rather than lower our likelihood of suffering a collapse disaster. The claim that the war with Iran is making the U.S. safer is absolutely wrong. There is no current or near-term threat of Iranian nuclear attacks, but they could release a deadly virus against us now that would be far more devastating. And the war on Iran is increasing the likelihood that they will execute attacks on our homeland, like releasing a deadly H5N1 virus. Even worse, our government is opposing regulation of AI that can be used to develop new and worse weapons of mass destruction and super intelligent artificial general intelligence that could exterminate humanity. Watch this briefing from the Collapse Survival Institute that explains why artificial intelligence is the worst threat humanity has faced. It documents the threat of AI and explains why superintelligent artificial general intelligence must be completely banned and prevented, enforced by an international AI control alliance led by the US and China that enforces AI controls. You do not get honest threat assessments or information from our government, dominated by the two perverted political parties in constant partisan political battle, unencumbered by truth, always focused on re-election and campaign donations, not the proper job of protecting us against threats that we can't handle on our own. The Collapse Survival Institute recommends that everyone get the Collapse Survival app on their phone to get advance warnings of a pending collapse disaster. The extra hours or days of warning you get could save your life. Subscribe to the Collapse Survival Institute channel to get honest threat assessments, not self-serving partisan government propaganda.